Seminarium i våra Rysslandsdagar, våra årliga Rysslandsdagar, som vi detta år inleder på Svenska institutet, roligt nog. Vi är förstås, som ni har fått program och ni vet vad som kommer att hända här. Vi kommer att tala om Shrinking Space, Challenges and Responses, om civilsamhällets utmaningar och människorättsrörelsens utmaningar i Ryssland idag. Och efter en paus med utlovad borsch, så kommer vi att fortsätta med proteströrelsen som vi ser i dagens Ryssland. Men först skulle jag vilja lämna över ordet till Svenska institutets Kurt Bratteby.
Tack. Ska jag börja på engelska eller på svenska? Tycker du?
Kör på engelska tycker jag.
Okay. Thank you for the introduction. I'm Kurt Bratteby. I'm Deputy Director General of the Swedish Institute and head of our Department for International Relations. And I would very much like to welcome you to and Östgruppen to this seminar this evening. Although we are not officially co-organizers, we are very proud from the Swedish Institute to host you here. I would just like to say a few words about the Swedish Institute, and I also would very much like to welcome our Russian invited guests and speakers. Just to give you a very brief picture of what kind of organization we are a public agency under the Ministry for Foreign Affairs, and we work very closely with the Swedish foreign missions abroad in providing communications about Sweden and building relations with audiences, with decision makers, with people in the cultural sphere, in education and research, in all over the world. What you can see here on the wall is an example of what we do. This is an exhibit about migrants coming to Sweden, and a topic that has been very much in focus during the last 2 years, I would say. And this is an example of a very flexible format that can be used in order to show what it means to come to Sweden as a migrant. Russia is perhaps, I would say, the country that we have the most cooperation with. When it comes to budget resources, we allocate, there's no other country that we allocate more budget resources to. So we cooperate with, we provide support for cooperation with Russia, both civil society cooperation, but also scholarships and cultural cooperation grants on a bilateral basis, but also on a regional basis. So Russia is both part in bilateral cooperation between Sweden and Russian partners, and we have programs that are on a bilateral basis. For instance, our Creative Force program, that many of you, I'm sure, know. But we also have Russia included in many regional cooperation projects and in programs that have a regional scope. So with this, I would just like to once more say that we are happy that you're here, and I very much look forward to a very interesting evening together. Thank you.
Thank you. And I forgot to mention my own name is Tobias Ljungvall. We have 4 participants in the first panel tonight. You will meet them all in time. We will start with our Russian guests, and first I would like to welcome Konstantin Baranov from the Youth Human Rights Movement in Voronezh. Is that true? Or St. Petersburg, maybe?
Well, one of the headquarters in Voronezh.
Please, step up.
Thank you for the introduction. I hope that the mic works,
Yes.
you can hear me. Yeah, actually, well, the organization that I represent is an international network. We have one of our headquarters in a provincial Russian city which is called Voronezh. That's historically how it happened, that the movement kind of started from an initiative group based in this city. And it was important for us to keep this grassroots connection so that we are not saying that we are based in Moscow or in any other capital city, but we are not only working in Russia and on Russia, but more or less regionally, meaning the post-Soviet area, the former republics of the Soviet Union, because we feel that there are still a lot of similarities, a lot of common problems and challenges, and we have so much to exchange among ourselves, and lots of opportunities and reasons to support each other. The reason why I'm speaking here today is that, well, we were, in our network, we were working on the topic of space for civil society, challenges to this space, and ways of confronting those challenges for the last 10 years. And we tried to approach this both in terms of reaction, in terms of, well, what do we do when something really bad happens, but also in terms of some proactive action when we try to widen our space, when we try to create some opportunities for that. It started mostly with countries like Belarus, where most of the repressive practices were first tested, which were then borrowed partly by Russia, by Azerbaijan, by some Central Asian states. But now my home country, Russia, is kind of leading this trend and actually experimenting with more ways of restricting civil society activities, which are again borrowed by the neighboring countries. And I will try not to speak about too much about the challenges that we have, just to give a brief outline, probably. But I think most of that you already know from the news or from your work. Sorry, but I will try to focus more on what can be done actually to support those who try to work in those conditions in Russia and to make their work possible. Speaking in general terms, we can say that the legal framework that is currently in place in Russia and the general climate in terms of public opinion, media coverage, etc., actually pushed human rights defenders and civil society organizations beyond the legal space. So we are working on the edge of the legal space, and every time we do something, we risk of violating some laws or regulations, of becoming criminals. That's the reality that we find ourselves in now. Part of our work has to become non-public. We are still trying not to go fully underground, not to get back to the times of Soviet dissidents, because we don't see a way out of there. So we still try to remain public, to interact with the publics, and try to promote some certain things publicly. And when we thought of this situation we find ourselves now, and what is possible, what is not possible, and where we would rely on international support, we came out with the kind of concept or idea of complex support for primarily for human rights organizations and activists, but that would also apply to civil society in more general terms. And also we were focusing mostly on Russia, but we think that what we suggest is to a very large extent applicable to other closed societies, like I think the term is quite familiar. And to those of them where civil society is still existent, it's not fully destroyed or swept out of the country yet. So there is still someone to support, and they do have an intention to continue activities. There is a paper actually, it's not a report as it's called in the program, I would call it a policy paper. It's the version that we present today here is a shorter public version, but we are ready to discuss it in more details, certain points that are mentioned here, but some of them are not so public for obvious reasons. You can have a copy later, there are copies on that table, but I will first present the general outline of it. So we start with the question, why support human rights defenders? Why is it so important? And in our opinion, of course, we are, as human rights defenders ourselves, we are not objective. But still we think that in closed societies, when very often you find other democratic actors very weak or non-existent, because, well, normally the authorities first attack the political opposition, then they attack independent media, now they come to the civil society, which was perceived in a more neutral way probably than the political opposition, for instance. So the other democratic actors are too weak already, and civil society is, if it's not the remaining actor which can preserve actually producing real change, values of short dignity, freedom, that's and non-violence. How we see the current situation in Russia, for instance, now. Still, it is civil society that would come up to the stage with those values, with those technologies and social capital when the situation changes. And if we want this non-violent transformation to happen, then civil society needs to be strengthened and kept alive, let's say. Now, from our point of view, it's not only important to save individuals who are under threat or persecuted, but actually keep the very opportunity to continue civil society activities. It means that, well, taking everyone out of the country is not a solution. Then civil society is basically destroyed in the country. It's not there anymore. From our point of view, this is only possible if there is strategic support at three different levels. First, well, it's most obvious and most familiar for everyone is in supporting individual activists and groups, organizations, which currently work under pressure. And it's usually framed in terms of protection, but we would love to see the approach reframed to support, because the current protection programs are too much focused on security training, on anti-burnout activities, on temporary relocation measures, things like that, which are quite helpful in certain situations, but they do not ensure the sustainability of human rights work. And we think that the attention should be shifted a bit to such things as raising the visibility and public recognition of the work of human rights defenders. We understand that with the smear campaigns and generally hostile climate inside the country, the opportunities for those conducting human rights work to get some public recognition are very limited, if existent at all. But we think that this can be compensated by international attention. So any additional visibility at the international level for people from human rights organizations, for activists, is really valuable, because on the one hand, it gives them the sense that their work is recognized, that they are not doing it in vain. But on the other hand, it also sends a message to the authorities that these people are not, would not be targeted so easily, because someone knows them abroad, someone will be speaking up for them. And there is a big range of things that can be done in this regard, starting from various human rights awards and honors. There are a number of them in Sweden, for instance, be it state awards, parliamentary awards. Some universities do have their own human rights awards. There are different types of honorary degrees at universities that can be conferred to human rights defenders if it's a closed topic, if there is a human rights educational program, for instance, at the university. And what is the most important here is that, well, not the award which comes with some money component or something precious with it, because this can actually put people at additional risk, like they will be seen as receiving foreign money. But actually, if there is a public ceremony, if there is media coverage, if there are important meetings accompanying this event, and yeah, people get to the newspaper headlines, they got pictures with some important politicians and so on. Secondly, there is the issue of ensuring social security and well-being of human rights defenders, which is probably less popular topic. But the problem is that, well, in a situation when many human rights NGOs cannot operate legally, people working for them are not officially employed. So they do not get official medical insurance, they do not get any perspectives of good pension when they are retired. And this, of course, creates this feeling of social insecurity and instability. And there are ways of thinking on the part of donors, mainly, how this can be compensated, how alternative ways of supporting social security for those people can be ensured. I will not get very much into detail here, but we are ready to discuss that. And third, in this first level is emergency assistance. And it's very important that it's when people are put under trial, imprisoned, or actually pushed out of the country, that this help comes not only for themselves, but also for members of their families. Immediate members of the families, like minor children or elderly parents, their spouses, because, well, a person working at risk, if he or she knows that in case anything happens, their family will be protected, it's easier to make a decision to continue the work than otherwise.
Are you talking about Schengen visas?
Emergency visas are part of it. But sometimes it's also financial support to families, because they can lose their main wage earner if the father of the family or the mother is imprisoned, for instance. So there are different measures that should be extended to families as well. So there are other things here, but I think the idea is more or less clear. That support should be not only reactive but also proactive and aimed at some sustainability, that people know that they have something behind them. Second level of support is actually investing in the infrastructure in institutions that support human rights work. And it's a wide range of institutions, both at national and international level, both official state institutions and public institutions, mixed ones. And the idea is that, you cannot continue your work in a vacuum. You need to have tools, and institutions are the tools for human rights work. So one of the things here is supporting national human rights institutions, including ombudspersons or human rights councils, And the main idea is that they should not be isolated inside the country, but they should have opportunities for international exchange, because this way they will be more oriented towards dialogue with human rights defenders and actually working on the core human rights agenda. Secondly, we lack tools for domestic fundraising. We lack tools for crowdfunding, for special structures that would fundraise inside the country and then give funds to human rights groups and activists. There is official state funding, which is for many of us is not an option, and it cannot compensate all the needs, all their support all the activities. But the culture of public donations is not so much developed in Russia, unfortunately. So there should be some investment into that, because this would send the signal that the work of human rights groups is needed inside the country itself, not only in the West. Also, it concerns the physical infrastructure, their premises. Many NGOs do not have a permanent office, and they can be very easily evicted from it. And we know lots of cases, and that's really a weak spot for many of our colleagues. We don't have, apart from Moscow or St. Petersburg, we don't have very many meeting places where, like this one, for instance, where you can host events on human rights issues. That's also very much restricted. And this is also something that can be supported, and it will give basis for human rights work. We're also looking into different structures that will be systemically working to support civil society in Russia from abroad, in cities like Stockholm, or in the capitals of intergovernmental organizations like Geneva or Brussels or Vienna. Why? Because if there will be a permanent structure which will care about raising awareness on what is happening in Russia or in the region, Eastern Europe and Eurasian region, it will be organizing some trips and events for Russian civil society activists from other countries. It will keep things permanently on the agenda and will also help to ensure visibility and other types of support. Last thing to mention here, probably, is also investing into intergovernmental organizations. What we see increasingly, unfortunately, also from the states like Sweden, is that they are less and less confident in the importance and the efficiency of organizations like the UN, Council of Europe, and they more and more rely on bilateral diplomacy when they deal with countries like Russia. And we think that it's a dead end, because intergovernmental organizations give a real platform for dialogue on the one hand, and on the other hand, that's where international norms and standards are being developed and promoted. And you cannot do it bilaterally only. So we think that kind of the attention should be again returned to work within those intergovernmental organizations. The third level to finish with is even wider. So we started with targeted individual support as the first level. Second level was institutions or infrastructure. The third level is the general environment, the climate. And creating a more favorable climate requires actually promoting human rights ideas and values. That's something we cannot do effectively by ourselves now, because we don't have access to traditional media. Public expression of human rights organizations and groups is restricted at the moment, but we think there is this hostile official discourse. But we think that there are opportunities to do something jointly with international partners via non-traditional channels of communication. For instance, Swedish institute could commission an awareness-raising campaign to some PR agency, which also has operations in Russia. And human rights defenders could be invited as consultants to help create the content for it. But they would not be officially involved as those actually doing this campaign in Russia. So this is the type of thinking that we are trying to explore with our international partners. Also, there is an increasing number of NGOs that are created by expats from Russia and other countries in Western states, because people are fleeing the country or moving for work purposes, family purposes, but some of them are really compassionate and want to support us at home. So support to these communities of expats is also important. On the one hand, because they can help us at home, but on the other hand, because they can work with Russian-speaking people here. Probably for Sweden it's not such a big problem, but for countries like Germany, for instance, or Poland, where there are lots of migrants from our part of the world, and they're mostly relying on Russian media as news sources. Like influencing their minds, their viewpoints is also something that needs to be explored more and more. And maybe the last thing that I will mention here, which is also relevant to the place where we are now, probably, is also looking more into academic cooperation as a channel of promoting human rights ideas and values. But we would love to see it not going separately and in parallel with civil society cooperation, but also as a joint effort of universities, for instance, establishing some double diploma programs or exchange programs, but also inviting practitioners, human rights defenders, as content providers, as those who can share their experiences and their knowledge as part of those programs. Because this way it's also kind of an additional channel for us to address new people, to address students, and to get some official platform for what we can say. So that this is the kind of very general outline of the concept. I'm ready to answer any questions, and maybe something will come up for further discussion. And yeah, you can have a copy afterwards. Thank you.
Yes, there are freshly printed copies of Konstantin's report on the desk here, and we'll open up for questions in a bit. First, I would like to welcome the next participant. She is a representative. She's a consultant with something called Team 29, and she also leads a project called Informeter. Her name is Tatiana Tolstenyova, and
hello, do you hear me?
Yes.
Hear her. She will tell us more about strategies for survival for Russian NGOs and organizations.
Thank you very much. First of all, please take my sincerest apologize for my English, because it's much more worse than Konstantin's. And I'm really proud to be here, because it's wonderful people and it's a wonderful opportunity to speak about civil society in Russia. Generally, I'm come from St. Petersburg, and I consult for development organization is called Team 29. Maybe you have heard about us because our lawyers take part in the Valerun case. It's a Swedish diplomat who was lost in some way in Lubyanka, and nowadays his relatives want to take some information about his destiny from archives of Lubyanka. And focus of our organization is access to official government information. And we want to make Russian government more transparent. And that's why we work with freedom of information request a lot, and we work with litigation connected to freedom of information a lot. And also, one part of our activity is working with state treason accusation. And maybe you have heard about, for example, Oksana Sevastidi. It's a woman who Oksana Sevastidi is a woman who was accused in the state treason because she sent an SMS in Georgia in 2008. And she was pardoned by Putin this year because our lawyers took a part in it. So our organization was rooted in another organization which was included in the foreign agent list in 2014. So everything which Konstantin was said, I know pretty good because I was inside in the organization when it was included in the foreign agent, and after that when we restructured and rebuilt our organization just to avoid all negative consequences of foreign agent list. Yeah, and what we can say, what trends are generally what's going on and what we face every day. And first of all, of course, it's an absolute lack of any strategic planning. You know, we work in a constantly changing environment, and nobody knows what will come next and what will come today. And we just try to create some ways to struggle with our repressive government. We have no strategic planning, because our strategic planning in Russia could be, I think, 3 days or maybe a week. It's a very best case when we have a year budget and something like this. So lack of strategic planning and absolutely unpredictable circumstances is our reality. And for example, we also have no office, and Konstantin also mentioned that it is quite a normal situation for our human rights organization, that we rent some office, but our how would say, person who... Landlord, yes. He can just say, and every day say us, just go away because we don't like you anymore. Of course, Team 29 work in Russia without legal entity, and it gives us possibility to be more flexible, because no legal entity means that we will never be included in the foreign agent list once again. But it also creates a lot of administrative and bureaucracy challenges when we need to overcome. And for example, the majority of our team work like individual entrepreneurships, so they have a lot of projects with problems with accountants, with special reporting to Russian government on the annual basis, and so on and so on. And also we have this, history connected with a foreign agent, yeah. And when people try to Google our history, they understand that okay, we were labeled by like a foreign agent previously. It also affected our reputation.
Before you had an organization with a different name that was registered as
it
became a foreign agent.
Yes. And in these circumstances, we try to find some ways how we could be effective and how we can be creative. And it pushes us to find absolutely new ways which NGO has never done before in Russia. And when we rebuilt our organization and when we started Team 29 in 2015, our main idea was to be a human rights defender organization which speaks in the same language as our audience speak. Because the main problem of traditional human rights defender organizations in Russia was, being a little bit far away from the general audience, because the problems are very difficult, and the language which these problems are discussed and published, different papers and information, that are also very difficult, and the general audience just cannot understand what the human rights defenders generally do. And that's why our idea was just to take technologies from communication sphere, from marketing, from journalistic, from social media marketing and so on, and try to translate traditional human rights defenders vocabulary to the very ordinary way, to the very, very ordinary ways for using content and for taking content and so on. And that's why our focus was not on traditional reports and so on, but on our website, social media marketing, and even using marketing technologies. This is very important because Konstantin said that, okay, in Russia there is no special circumstances for crowdfunding, yeah, because there is no sustainable traditions of supporting organization by private donations. And there is no sustainable trust for general public to the human rights defender organization. And one of the window of opportunity nowadays for organization like our or like Konstantin, it's try to find the ways to the people's hearts and minds and understand and translate them and explain them why we are important and why our work is important. But unfortunately, nobody has a special experience in our team in working like this. And very bright and beautiful example how different organizations in different countries can help us is that we have a consultant, and it is pro bono consultant. This is person which we are not pay, and this is consultant from Univeller. She's working in, I think, Denmark maybe, and she very poor speak Russian, but she tries to do it. And she find us by herself and suggest us her assistants like a marketing specialist, and she helps us a lot because she creates for us something which calls consumer journey. And when person comes to our site and read our articles and read about us and about our cases, and next one, this person goes to donation page and donate. Yeah, and if this consumer's journey works good, person comes to our site and works there, and after that goes to the donation letter and make a donation page and make a donation to us. And you know, this is really, I think this is really in very inspiring situation when somebody from another country find Team 29 project in Russia, which have never maybe heard before, and it just gives very practical and very tailored oriented advice, which really make our organization much more sustainable than it was before. Because this year, it's the very first year when our organization supports collects private donations. We have never done it before because we have no professional competence in it. And speaking about crowdfunding, it's really quite challenging, but I think that it is some window of opportunity which we have to maybe see more carefully, and maybe this is some special new area of communication with our audiences, which has a potential to make us more sustainable and more effective in the future. And maybe one more new language which human rights defender organizations should also explore for themselves is the language of the video. Yeah, because I'm pretty sure that everyone here heard about great success of Navalny's movie about Dmitry Medvedev. Yeah, and
did you hear about it?
Yes, yeah. And it's considered to be that one of the component of the success of this case. It is the form which how Navalny sells his content to the audience. Yeah, he could make a report. He could make a very long explanational scheme how it really works. But they make a movie, and truly speaking, by making this movie, they don't attract any high qualified specialists like movie makers, producers, and so on. They just do it by themselves. Yeah, and it is very easy to understand when you just see this movie and see that it's okay. It's interesting to see, but it's more or less unprofessional. Yeah, and the young audience who don't see TV, of course, in Russia because it's absolutely propagandic and I don't know, it's really hurt to see. And they see this movie in YouTube, and maybe they saw it to the parents, or maybe they saw it to to the friends, and so on. And this is quite good way to disseminate the content nowadays in Russia among the young audience. And I think that if human rights defender organization pay more attention to using this way of communicating, we could be much more successful that in other way. And one more thing that maybe is the last thing I want to underline, that of course when I visit for different foreign countries and speak with different peoples, usually they ask me, we see TV and we Google something about Russia and human rights defender activity, and we see that it is impossible to work because government pressure and corruption and censorship and so on and so on and so on. And so when you plan to stop this activity, or maybe when you plan to go in some another country and so on, And I understand that situation inside in Russia is completely different because our situation is unpredictable and we don't know what to be next, but it is a lot of work that could be done and we see a lot of windows opportunities. And being heard by people like you and being visible by people like you, we understand that, okay, we are not alone in this, I don't know, very unfriendly way. And of course, all these recommendations, when Konstantin underlines, they are really very important. And I see that they are really demanded by the community because I'm the member of the community, and all these recommendations which Konstantin mentioned, I can support 100%. And being also on the ground, I see that we can do a lot of different good things, but we need to use some approaches which was never used by our colleagues before, because situation in the sector completely changed things. I don't know, 2012 maybe, and of course with international support and with support of different countries, we see that we are not alone, and this gives us some hope. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tatiana. There's lots to talk about there from what you and Konstantin have said. Of course, one topic here is what we can do from Sweden for Russian civil society, and I would like Åsa Lundmark from the Swedish Institute, and just tell us a little bit about what you do from here as an official institution, I would say.
What do we do? I'll try and talk without the microphone. or maybe I use this one. Yes, what can we do? Thank you very much. It was very interesting to listen to you two, both of you, because we are, of course, thinking at the Swedish Institute, how can we use our money in the best way? As Kurt started to say, we put a lot of money into the collaboration with Russia. We do it in different ways. It's a lot of scholarships, both to Sweden and from Sweden, and we can also support other kind of collaboration. One thing that you mentioned that I think is quite important is how is the picture of Russia in Sweden? Because that is also something that we have to tackle. We are hoping for Swedish organizations to collaborate with Russia, but of course they think, oh, what's happening in Russia? Is it possible? Can you go there? Are we putting our partners to the risk if we are collaborating with them? So that is something that we are, trying to think about, and it's also a question of the picture of Russia in Sweden. That's something that we need to kind of talk about. So that's one thing. I can mainly go into one of the programs that I'm responsible for, and that's the program called Creative Force. I guess a lot of people here have heard about it, or maybe even tried to get funded by it. And it's, when I heard you talk about the new ideas and the new ways of doing things in Russia, I kind of feel it could fit quite well. Because it is, of course, depending on a Swedish organization wants to collaborate with the Russian one. I know the Swedish Institute, we can do a lot of things, but we can't kind of take on all of the collaboration with Russia. We need the Swedish organization and the Swedish participants to be that part. But for instance, if we are talking about doing kind of a PR or marketing project, that's quite possible to do inside the program called Creative Force. But you need kind of an organization in Sweden that is interested in doing this and collaborating with someone in Russia. So the theme of the program is culture and media, and inside that theme a lot of things can kind of work its way on. Of course, it's always promoting the good ideas. You can do it in many ways, but culture is often a quite good way of bringing up this subject to a discussion, and it's also a good way of getting public attention or media attention to things. We have worked quite a lot together with a theater project called Seven. I don't know if it's been to Russia yet, but it has been to other countries, which is talking about, you know, harassing women and gender equality issues. And if you get people to participate in that, you can get quite a lot of media attention to the issues, and it's also a way of bringing up these human rights questions. Well, I don't know if I should say so much more. I mean, this is what we do, and we do need Swedish organizations that can participate and work together with colleagues and friends in Russia. Okay?
Thank you very much. I think we've made use of Creative Force program more than once before. It sounds familiar at least. Yeah. So Martin Uggla, my colleague, my boss from Östgruppen. Please, Martin.
Thank you. It's very good to hear that people in Russia are continuing their struggle for human rights and democracy, despite all those problems and risks that are connected to their work. But it also actualizes the need for support, and that is the theme of this seminar. And of course, various forms of support are needed. We could talk about financial support, moral support, political support. All these different kinds of supports are very important. As for the financial support, I think also that it's very important to have a consistency from the donor side, from abroad, so that donors don't give up. We hear the activists, the human rights defenders, they don't give up, and of course donors should not give up only because the authorities are creating problems, obstacles, risks for this work. Konstantin mentioned that the human rights defenders in Russia today are working on the edge of legality. But it's then important to have in mind that Russian laws in this context are repressive and not complying with international law. So of course what the human rights defenders do are not contrary actually to international law, and it's just considered illegal because of the fact that the law in Russia itself is repressive. And when it comes to financial support, it's also then important to stress that financial support is legitimate. Financial support to human rights work, to human rights activities from abroad is legitimate, no matter what repressive legislation in a country says. It's guaranteed in UN resolutions that also Russia is obliged to comply with that. So we should be consistent from abroad and don't give up our support, of course. But another important thing here is that we also must show flexibility, because as Tatjana mentioned, there is a very unpredictable development in Russia. You don't know from one day to another what will happen, and that also means that the support from abroad must be flexible. We must be ready to adapt to sudden changes, for example, when it comes to risks of these stakeholders in Russia. But it's their accepted level of risk that should guide us, not the other way around. As for the political support, Konstantin mentioned the importance of giving recognition of NGOs, of human rights defenders, and I do agree. It's very important, and it can be done in several ways. To give them recognition, to give legitimacy to the civil society actors, to include them in in the program of official visits, not only as a separate meeting aside of the more official meeting with the authorities, for example in Russia, but trying to invite participants also from the civil society sector to these meetings. I'm sure that from the civil society side they wouldn't oppose such an invitation. Perhaps the authorities wouldn't be so happy, but that's something that the Swedish side, for example, should push for when they have the opportunity. Different projects funded by from abroad should always involve these actors from the civil society, from the human rights movement. As Konstantin also mentioned, it's important to always have this inclusion or involvement, just exactly in order to give recognition and to give status and legitimacy to this sector. But it's also important to react with criticism on violations of human rights in Russia on the more political level. Well, we know about the foreign agents law, we know about the law of undesirable organization, and we know about political prisoners, we know about violations that occur more or less every day or every week in Russia. And what we would like to see more of from Östgruppen is sharp criticism and reactions when something happens on a concrete level, and so that this would be done in public as well, so it would be heard. And so that these human rights violations thereby have consequences and not are just being forgotten. I think that's very important also in terms of solidarity, and I do think that showing solidarity is one of the most important ways for us abroad to support civil society in Russia, to support human rights defenders, and to support a positive democratic development in the country. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. I would like to invite Tatiana and Konstantin back to the station also and open up for questions. I have a few questions myself, but I will start from the floor. Does anyone have a question? Please.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your inspiring presentation. I'm such a huge fan of both of the organizations, and thank you so much for coming here. My question is basically about young human rights defenders in Russia. I would say that during recent years we saw how many people left the country and how, you know, the government became more and more oppressive. I would like to ask you, do you think that young people actually are going to human rights activities, and if so, does, you know, use of social media help that?
Good question. Who would like to answer?
Yeah, I can probably start. Because actually the mission of my organization is involving young people into human rights activism. And we are doing it by many ways, but mostly by awareness-raising campaigns and human rights education. We do programs on non-formal human rights education for young people. And I would say, of course it becomes increasingly more difficult to involve young people into human rights activism these days than compared to 10 years ago, for instance, when I started this myself. Because back then it was, it could be seen as a good career opportunity, like you get the volunteer experience that you can put on your CV, and for instance, for young lawyers, an internship in a human rights NGO could be a good start of their work. Or, young managers, people with other career aspirations. And now it's more of a hard choice, I would say. Because in some places in Russia, you can be openly told that if you get into human rights activism, you will never get a decent job in this city. That's what I heard from my former boss 7 years ago, let's say. And of course, many people have to make this choice. They have to weigh if this is something I really want to do, because it's not just the fun stuff for a brief period of my life. It will remain in my background forever, probably. But I would say that in big cities there is still a very considerable number of young people who are very much interested in activism. We run permanent educational programs for young people on human rights in Moscow and St. Petersburg. And every year there are several hundreds of young people coming to our seminars in those cities. And actually, thousands of them actually stay involved after the seminars come to the end. So this is something which gives us hope. But it's not so much about social media, because social media is more, well, it's a communication channel, simply. It's something you can kind of send your message to, they make the invitation, but people get involved through personal contact. When they listen to some inspiring stories, when they get some first-hand experience, then they get really involved.
Tatiana?
Truly speaking, I mostly agree with Konstantin, yeah, because unfortunately nowadays it's quite a controversial issue for a person to join openly to the human rights defender organization, because it really could be harmful for future career. But from the other hand, in practice of our team, we once a month we audit all our Facebook and Contact group, and we see who is people who reading us and who is disseminating our information. And we see that the group of people who's under 30, it is one of the biggest part of our audience. Yeah? And we see how this audience react to our messages. And they react in some very special spirit. They send that they believe in us and they trust us. And this is one of the point which I spoke on the previously, that this is the point that gives us hope. Yeah. Okay. These people maybe don't follow us as volunteers. Yeah. Maybe they don't support us like our recurrent donors or something like this. But we see that they share our information and they trust us and they believe in us. And my favorite type of messages when these people disseminate information about our court wins, when our lawyers win in courts. Yeah. And despite of the fact that Konstantin shared with us, we have a volunteer project we call Rosatvet, and this project mainly oriented to the young lawyers, young students from the law faculty. And every year, around 50 students go and work through our volunteer programs. And of course, it really could be risky for them, but they still come. Yeah. And maybe it's not so bad, really.
Can I ask a follow-up question here? When I first came into contact with these questions many years ago, when Putin was not yet president, the NGO sector, which was, there was quite a lot of support programs from Sweden and other countries, and the pressure was not that hard from the government. I guess there was still some, the reputation of NGOs was not as solid as maybe it is today, because the situation has gotten harder. And back then you could actually think of an NGO worker as someone who is, in some cases, opportunistic, making use of foreign money, working them off and having an easy job. But it just struck me that today the situation is harder, and I never encountered these. I haven't been to Russia for a long time, but I read stuff from the internet, and I don't encounter these attitudes anymore. Would you say that the respect for the NGO sector has increased? You understand my question?
Yeah.
I think so, yeah. Well, it's maybe not so black and white. And when we observed the media coverage of the foreign agents campaign in the first years, I was surprised to see how many positive and or neutral news pieces or extensive media reports appeared in Russian media about NGOs which were targeted, about their work. So actually it was a real big information wave that we never witnessed before, because when there was no severe pressure, many NGOs could stay unnoticed, and their work was really known only to their direct beneficiaries, let's say. But I would say that there is also kind of this general increasing polarization of society and views. So among those more or less 14% of people who are of pro-democratic, liberal, whatever you call it, views, their understanding of NGO work and the support of what NGOs are doing most probably raised. But with the other part of the population, I think their official propaganda and smear campaigns also work quite effectively in the other direction. So you get this more division of views among different people.
So the foreign agent campaign was extremely popular, because it really, in some point, it really ruined the general trust to the sector, because they include organization in the foreign agent list one by one, because of course everybody understands that Russian prosecutor office or Ministry of Justice could include all foreign agent organization in one day in one list, but it would be only the one news, and including organization every month or maybe twice a month, it's creates some wave of news, something like supports some special temperature and support some special level of discussion about foreign agent and so on. But despite of this fact, a lot of organizations, especially in Moscow, in St. Petersburg, they just create their own fundraising campaigns because people know them and because people pay attention that, so this organization included the foreign agent list and they need our support, and so we just need to give them some money and to mobilize and to just maybe I just will read the news on the Facebook to know more about it, maybe I will Google about it more, and I can say just for some audiences, it became really much more important after organization was included in the list.
Yeah, very good answer. Thank you. I saw some hands here before.
Hi. Is the stigmata connected with being branded Иностранный агент still as big as it was when this campaign was was started? And what about this new wave of branding journalists as foreign agents? And also, can you say something about this enormous group of Russians which are the sort of lethargic masses, the ones that aren't really touched? Is the going down of the economy making them more interested in societal change, or yeah?
Yeah, that's more than one question. Would you like to answer?
Let's do it. Okay. I will try to start again then. With regard to stigma, well, I think it's probably it's already faded a bit because there is certain level of getting used to certain news, certain messages by the people. And well, when the first organizations were targeted, that was a very strong signal. Well, at the moment it's more than 150 organizations that at some point were included in the foreign agents list. Some of them could get themselves removed from the list afterwards, but still, kind of, they still have this background, this label with them. And when it's so many groups, well, it's easy to demonize a few, but it's more difficult to demonize many. well, probably that's something to argue about, but that's my take on that. And also, the second reason for that probably is that our authorities actually did not stop with the foreign agents law. So they continue to invent other tools of discrediting civil society activities or any kind of independent activism, whatever. Discussion about extending the foreign agent status to media is part of it, but probably not the most dangerous one. I don't know if you heard about this or not. In the run-up to next presidential elections, which are going to happen next spring, there was a special commission created in the upper house of our parliament, the Russian parliament. The temporary commission to counter external interference in Russia's affairs. And this commission came up with some reports. So they propose very holistic concept of this external interference. And they propose adoption of additional legislation to counter that. And that would include everything, basically everything. NGO activities, media, academic activities, even direct contacts of Russian citizens with someone from abroad. So they want to wrap it up into some holistic concept. So that's something that we are expecting maybe from one day to another to be introduced as a draft bill to the parliament. And that would, of course, kind of bring the discussion further to their Cold War rhetorics. So the foreign agents label is not the most dangerous one at the moment, I would say.
And it really depends, I think, from the level of organization. I think for the small organization in the Russian region, it's still a threat to be included in the foreign agent list, because it's a regional level. The relations between people much more closer than in the big cities, and people are still afraid. For big organization, I think it's not a problem, because all organizations who want, they have overcome this obstacle in some way. Different organizations invent different ways. Some organizations close agencies in Russia, some organizations open something somewhere abroad, some organizations make networks, and it's like a new challenge that a lot of people just face and go next way. And I think you mentioned a new trend about marking foreign agent mass media and journalists, and it seems that it would be new campaign in the nearest time, and of course it's connected to the presidential election, and it also, from the perspective of our organization, it also would change somehow the landscape of independent journalism in Russia nowadays. Yeah, and okay, we will see what we will do, and of course I think a lot of our colleagues will be involved somehow in protection of the journalist, and the journalist also would need to find some way to overcome it. But next speaker, Pavel Chikov, who sits there, he suggests a lot of support to the journalists from Agora. I read in the channel on Twitter, so I think that if the best lawyers from Russian civil rights defenders space would support them, everything would be more or less okay.
Thank you. Olof Kleberg.
Olof Kleberg, I'm Vice Chairman of the OSCE network in Sweden, supporting the ideas of the OSCE, transparency, trust, and so on. Our Russian guests have to, thank you for your presentations, but you have to understand two basic things in the Swedish society. The Swedish Institute is making a good job, but inside a very bureaucratic society. Secondly, Sweden, the mentality, as Åsa mentioned, the mentality in Sweden is very anti-Russian. Probably one of the most anti-Russian mentalities in Western Europe. All the three biggest newspapers are heavily anti-Russian, writing heavily anti-Russian, also in the news pages. So we have to rethink. This is not only a question of the opposition, the Democrats in Russia. It's also a question of how we handle the connections between Sweden and Russian civil societies here ourselves. And we have to do a lot of things, I would say, in order to support you, in order to get your experiences inside our society. So I just mentioned small civic society groups have big difficulties to get any support. Okay, Åsa told us about this creative force. It is terribly bureaucratic, that's my experience, terribly. Maybe big organizations can have a chance. Small organizations do not have the patience, do not have the money, do not have the people in order to apply. That's one thing. The Swedish government and society must understand that we must take risks when we support opposition democracy outside Sweden. We can't have the formal bureaucratic agenda as we used to inside Sweden. Well, and thirdly, I think we should have some sort of endowment, a fund, where led by civic society organizations, not by the Swedish Institute, not by a state organization, not by the government, where it should be possible to apply for grants for cultural experiences not with the state, not with the Bolshoi theater, but with the small theater inside Russia, small theaters inside Sweden, as an example. But there are no politicians who really want or have the courage, I would say, have the courage to propose something like that, because they think that most Swedish citizens are anti-Russian, which is not the question. It is not the question, but the general debate and the political parties are so heavily engaged in the anti-Putin propaganda. I could understand that, but we shouldn't criticize the civil society cooperation. On the other hand, we should strengthen it. I have a small leaflet down there where you could get more information about how we are working. I'm sorry, I was so upset, but the Swedish...
Han viftade med sin mikrofon så det hördes inte.
Olof said that he's from the OSCE network. He's the head of the OSCE network in Sweden, an NGO, and he thinks that we need to have more courage and flexibility in cooperating with Russian civil society, and there's also a problem with anti-Russian attitudes blocking this cooperation. Was that a good sum up?
Thank you.
Yes? We had another question from the gentleman next to Olof.
I am Jerker Hansson. I'm a psychiatrist, and I've been working for some years with different projects in Russia. But really, I've experienced the problem you described, Olof, that it's very difficult if you don't, if you are not backed up by a big organization to get something done. So therefore, it will be difficult to get these inter-people connections that really are very important. Also for our security. For security, NATO has been in focus, but that I think is a more dangerous prospect. Actually, from the beginning I had another question, and I've understood that human rights, that's something that comes from the Enlightenment movement in the 18th century in Europe, which never really reached Russia. And therefore I wonder, how is it with the human rights status in Russians? So I would like to hear that in comparison with what does the church say, Putin say, food on the table, etc.
That's an interesting question. Please.
Okay, yeah, I can actually comment on that probably. Well, when we start talking about human rights with young people at our kind of very basic introductory seminars, we actually discuss a bit the story of how the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was developed. And there is no popular knowledge about that, but Soviet Union was quite actively involved in the development of the text and suggested many ideas which actually were included in the text. And it never voted against it. So when there was voting on the Universal Declaration at the General Assembly of the United Nations, there were several abstentions. USSR was one of those who abstained from the vote, but they did not object, and they actually made their input in the text. So that's probably, I mean, you can of course argue if human rights are a Western invention, if it comes from Enlightenment period or from ancient times or whatever, but the system that we have now to protect human rights, which was created after the end of World War II, was created also with the participation of the Soviet Union. And that's something, the legacy that Russia should also accept as they accepted and said, okay, we are the official heirs of the Soviet Union, as our constitution says. So that's something that we need to continuously remind our authorities as well. And I would maybe also briefly comment on this issue that you raised about challenges of getting funding in Sweden. Well, of course, we know if it's state funding in any country, or particularly in Western democracies, if it's taxpayers' money, then it comes with bureaucracy and transparency requirements and excessive reporting requirements, and well, that's a challenge that our colleagues face more or less in all the countries. And of course, flexible money probably needs not to come from state sources. It needs to come from businesses, from citizens, or it should be state money which is delegated to some private entity to be managed, as is the case, for instance, partly now with the EU funding. They also thought of what are the ways of overcoming the bureaucratic requirements, and they created this European Endowment for Democracy, which can give flexible funding to non-registered groups, to some small initiatives, etc. And I can say that one of the best examples of cooperation with foreign partners that we had was with some sections of Amnesty International, which were able and willing to crowdfund for us in their own countries. So they presented some of our initiatives, some of our project ideas to their fellow citizens, and they were able to raise a substantial amount of money, which could be then transferred and managed flexibly. And that was one of the best funding support that we got. So I wonder if Amnesty Sweden would be interested in such kind of cooperation with any Russian group. That's one of the opportunities, and it also partly solves the problem of anti-Russian attitudes in the society, because if there is this direct appeal to the Swedish people and selling some of their work that Russian civil society groups are doing at home to them in a very clear and understandable way, then probably that would help also to build trust and other type of relations.
Also, would you like to say something about flexibility?
Well, I think you said it very well. Since we are a public agency, we do need a bit of bureaucracy and objectivity and transparency in what we do. But it's a good idea. I mean, I think if you come up with a good example or a project together with a Russian partner, I guess we can support this kind of, crowdfunding project. Could be a part, could be something to do. It's just, you should use the new ideas and new forms, and also, of course, use, the new technology for this kind of things.
Tatjana,
I just have nothing to add.
Martin, and I will finish with this verse of Martin because soup is done.
Very briefly then, because we all want soup. I just think it's very important to stress the universality of the human rights. Sometimes you hear about the importance of spreading European values, and I think it's quite counterproductive, because such arguments about human rights being a Western phenomenon, it's often used by the authorities, by the propaganda in Russia, in China, the authoritarian governed countries, as an argument against the concept of human rights. And that's we should talk about the universality of human rights and not try to make it some kind of European invention, because it's not.
Mm-hmm.